All right, hey there, and welcome to section 5. We're going to be covering layers and basically all this stuff over here on the right side of Photoshop. It's going to be really cool. Okay, so we've already used layers a good bit today because, well, you just kind of have to, even when you're just trying to show what to do with some of these tools. Let's go ahead and just talk a little bit about these layers. To do so, I'm going to just clean up what we've got here. A good way to clean up what you've got, basically, if you've got a whole lot of layers, just shift-click all those layers and hit Command G. So Command G is going to group those layers together, or Control G if you're on a PC, and then you can just name the group. So we'll just name this test, something like that, because that's what we started with. Okay, so we've now got a group. If you want to expand that group, hit this little arrow here, and it will expand. And you can hit this arrow, and it will contract again. This little eyeball right next to it will make it visible or not visible. Very cool. Okay, so layers work basically like kind of like sheets of paper here. I think you already know what layers are, but just in case, no worries. We're going to create a new layer by clicking on this new layer icon right down here, and I'll just paint on it. I'm going to create another one, and let's get out of our Pantone colors there. There we go. I'm going to paint on this layer. Now you can move these layers around using your move tool. Just click on those and move them around. You can make layers above or below one another as well. You can click and drag and move it right above your layer, or you can hold the controller command key and use your open and close brackets to move these layers up and down. The layer that's on the top is going to cover the layers that are directly under it. Yeah, so that's pretty much how layers work to begin with. We're going to get a little more complex, but that's the basic of layers. If you want to group things again, all you have to do is shift click the two of those and hit Command G, and we'll just group those together. Double click on that and call this test2 group. All right, so your layers. Now there are some other cool things you can do with layers. Let's make this layer invisible real quick. Let's make that group invisible. All right, so there's some other cool things you can do with layers. You can take advantage of your opacity. So you can lower the opacity of a layer like that. You can double click on a layer. Here we go. Which will bring up your layer style, where you can see you can control things like your opacity and your fill. Now the difference between opacity and fill, they look about the same until you put a blending style on them. Let's click something like a bevel and emboss. Okay, so we're going to click on this bevel and emboss here, and let's just increase our depth quite a bit. So it's going to look kind of interesting. We can change the direction of the light and things like that. All right, we can change our size. Let's not make it totally gross. All right, and we can soften it up if we want to do all kinds of fun options here. I really recommend playing around all day long. Just spend the next 6 days of your life playing with this tool. No, you don't have to do that. Let's go back to the blending options up here. So the difference again between opacity, just going to make everything invisible. Now fill opacity is going to make what you actually painted invisible, but it's still going to keep the bevel and emboss visible, which is kind of cool. Let's try a stroke on there as well. Let's put the stroke as this nice orange color. There we go. And make that a little bit larger. I know this doesn't look great, but I'm trying to show you guys what opacity and fill does. So opacity will bring it all the way, everything invisible. Fill will just be what was in there to begin with. So now you can get something that looks like that, which is kind of fun. Your channels here, you can have it be visible where the red channel is. You can see I knocked that out, and it's like, whoa, now it's not visible there. I don't do this very often, but you can play around with this to get some different effects. You can knock out shallow or deep. I don't really use that. That's interior transparency, but I don't really mess with that too much either as well. You can choose to have layer masking hide the effects of the group. So these are your layer effects, the bevel and emboss, things like that. Those are we'll get to layer masks in just a second. And you can choose blend if. And if you've been watching Flurn, you'll know that I'm a big fan of blend if. Let's just, you know what? We're gonna hit cancel there. That was incredibly ugly. That little like shape that we had there. So I'm just going to hit Command A. We'll hit delete, and then I'm gonna make something that just looks a little bit more, not like a scaly weird dragon. How's that? Let's just start off with a green rectangle. All right, and then you know what? Right down here, we're gonna choose a different hue. There we go, and hold Alt or Option and hit Delete to fill your foreground color. Fill with your foreground color. There we go. That's a little bit better, right? So you can bring your opacity a little bit lower, and you can bring your fill lower. At this point, they look the same. Let's double click on here again. Give it a nice layer style. You know, something that might look good. A stroke might look good in this case. Let's just make it a little bit larger. There we go, and we'll just bring our opacity down. There we go. Okay, so let's check out our blend if. Blend if basically says it's going to blend with the background if it's either lighter or darker. So this is the background, and this is this layer itself. And the trick is you want to hold down the Alt or the Option key whenever you click on your slider. So hold Alt or Option, and it's going to start fading away from your darks on this layer first, leaving your lights if they are light. It's going to do the same thing from the top. It's hard to tell with this layer because these are about the same, but when we work with the underlying layer, you're really going to start to tell. And this is where we mostly use it, as the underlying layer. So hold Alt or Option and sample from your underlying layer, and you can see it's starting to disappear from our darks, like it's no longer visible on our darks, but here in our highlights, now it is visible, which is really, really cool. We can do the opposite as well, Alt or Option, and now it's going to go away from the highlights on my underlying layer. It's only visible in the shadows. And you can click and drag this guy along with it as well. And the reason why it looks weird is because we have a light color visible in our shadows. Makes a little more sense to have a dark color visible in your shadows, right? Let's hit OK there. Well, we can make this a little bit darker if we wanted to. We're going to do that with adjustments and things like that in just a couple minutes. So we can make this darker, and that's not really that big of a problem. Okay, well, let's just say I'm going to hit Command J because we're going to copy this layer. There we go. We can see even if you move it around, your blending options and your layer effects and everything like that, they stay. So it's kind of just a really trippy thing that we're doing right now. But yeah, basically you can do whatever you want. Let's just undo this a couple of steps to go back to normal. Okay, now I'm going to create a new layer. We're going to create yet another square on this one. This one's going to be a nice orangey color. Okay, and I'm going to move this one around. Now, we'll get rid of that scribble. We don't need it. I like these squares better. Okay, so we have our couple of squares. We have a couple more options that we can actually choose to do with our layers. The first one is called a clipping mask. And basically, if I want, let's say I wanted this square to be visible, but I want it to only be visible where these other squares are visible. What I can do is I can right click on this and go to create a clipping mask, create clipping mask. And now we can see there's a little down arrow going to this layer. So now I can move this square around, but it's only going to be visible where my other squares are visible. I can move the other squares as well too. And that square will stay in place, but it's still only going to be visible where this layer is visible, which is very, very useful a lot of the time, especially when you guys are cutting things out of the background and things like that. It can be very useful. Okay, very cool. So that is a clipping mask. Let's just right click here and we'll go to release clipping mask, and now it's back to normal. Very cool. Now there are some other options you can do as well. These are our locks up here. So if you click on this first guy, this is a transparency lock. And now on this layer, let's say I'll grab a slightly darker color. It's only going to allow me to paint. See, there's no selection. I didn't select this out in any way, but it's only going to allow me to paint or edit anything that already has non-transparent pixels on it, because I did a transparency lock, right? So I can just make a large soft brush and, you know, kind of paint in there and do some fun things like this if I want to do that. Grab some color here, grab some orange. And no matter what I do, it's only going to allow me to paint, you know, even bring in some green. It's only going to allow me to paint on that square, right? So it's just a really cool way to, let's just fill it all with that color now. Just a really cool way to just affect a certain area of a selection. And it's really, really useful if you are cutting something out. Okay, the next one we have is our, is basically the opposite. All right. It will not let you paint on this brush, like, at all. It won't, like, it's just saying, hey, you can't do that. But I can still move it around if I want to do that. I just can't paint on it. I can't alter the pixels, but I can move it. The next one is a is a position lock. I can't move it around, but I can paint on it. And you can use these in conjunction. If I want both of these, then you can't do that. And then this final lock is just like, hey, you can't do anything with this. Sorry, you are not authorized. So that's what that guy does there. All right, cool. Well, let's go back here. I'm going to double click on our layer again. Okay. We're going to play with some layer styles now. I recommend you guys play around here. Just kind of clicking and moving things around. Bevel and Emboss will create a highlight on one edge and a shadow on another edge. And you can make it look, however you want using a variety of different functions here. It's kind of nice right there. I like that. A stroke on the outside will just create like a line right there on the outside. You can do all kinds of things. Like you can change your blend mode to, overlay or whatever you want to do that. It's going to kind of play in there. We're going to get to blend modes in just a little bit. You can put an inner shadow, an inner glow, color overlay, which just sticks a color right over top of it. Gradient overlay, pattern overlay. I don't use patterns too much. An outer glow. This can be kind of fun. Make the size nice and big, and then change this to something like soft light. So it's kind of like, has a nice little glow around it. And you can put a drop shadow, which just like makes it look like it's got a shadow coming off of it. There we go. Something like that. Generally, you don't want to use too many of these in conjunction with one another, but, maybe we'll just keep the outer glow on there for fun. Why not? Hit OK. Now, wherever we move this around, as you can see, it's got a little bit of a glow. It's like, wow, it's a really glowing rectangle square you got there. Okay, so that's kind of fun there. So that's working with your layer effects. Now, the next one we're going to get to is our blending modes. In our blending modes, you can change this from normal down to dissolve. I would really recommend just kind of playing around with these. This first is going to be your darken group. So each of these things is going to, in some way, make things darker. Multiply, color burn, linear burn. Play around with these guys. This is like the fun time when you get to like see how things blend together. Okay, you wind up getting something that you might not have ever thought would look good. Next, you have your lighten. So this is not going to affect anything that's actually lighter than that. Screen, just kind of like allows you to kind of see through it. Great for creating neon. Color dodge. Now, if something looks horrible, like color dodge, that doesn't look good at all. But if you lower the opacity a bit, it might wind up looking kind of cool. So, especially on a dress, it's like, wow, that's really kind of bringing out those colors. It did not work at a higher opacity, but don't discard it just yet, because at a lower opacity, it might just be your favorite best friend in the whole world, okay? So you never know. Linear dodge and lighter color, all these fun things. I would just recommend kind of like playing around here and having fun. The quickest way to flip through those is to hit your V tool. V tool is your move tool, and then hold down Command, and then hit. All right. Sorry. I get mixed up with my keyboard shortcuts real quick sometimes. All right. So you want to be on your move tool, and then hit hold down the Shift key and hold down hit plus or minus, and this will flip through your layer blending modes. All right. So screen looks kind of cool there. Yeah, that looks cool. And then you can do all these things in conjunction with each other. So we've got this in here. I'm going to hit Command T. We're going to stretch that out. There we go. I don't want this visible on her hair. So we're going to double click this. I don't want this visible where the underlying layer is darker because her hair is light. So I'm going to hold down Alt or Option. And I'm going to bring this in. And then there we go. It's just visible right around her hair, right? Cool. And we can lower the opacity a little bit if we want to do that. It's getting even better and better. And I haven't even used a layer mask yet, but I'm about to. Okay, so we've done over quite a bit of things having to do with our layers. Let's go ahead and cover layer masks. We'll get back to that in just a second. So we're going to create a new layer, and you know what? Well, actually not. We're going to use this layer here because I like it. We're going to use a layer. We're going to create a layer mask. So basically, a layer mask just makes a certain part of a layer visible and another part of a layer invisible. Okay, so we're going to click on our layer mask button right down here. And that's going to place a layer mask with this layer. So it's not the same as the layer. They go together. You can click on the layer or the layer mask. You can edit either one. All right, let's go to our brush tool, and I'm going to paint with black. Now, the thing about layer masks is they make things visible or invisible. So black will make something invisible. So wherever I'm painting on here with black, my layer is going to go away. Cool. And you get some like, wow, that's neat. Now, if I want it back, it's not really that hard. All I have to do is hit X on my keyboard to make my foreground color white, and now I'm painting with white, which is going to make my layer back visible again. So that's kind of the idea. Black makes things invisible, white makes things visible. You can use your brush tool, you can fill, you can go to like edit and down to fill, and you can choose to fill with our background color, which is black, and then you can paint white back over it. You do all kinds of different things, but layer masks just make things visible and invisible. Now the other cool thing you can do, they come linked by default. So if you use a move tool, they're going to link up, right? You can unlink them, and then I can move just the layer and my mask is going to stay the same place. Or I can move just my mask. So they are separate, but they are linked when you link them together. All right, pretty cool. So that's how layer mask works. I'm just going to hold command and hit delete, which fills with our background color, making our layer back white again, which is pretty cool. All right, so we've got that there. Let's click on this layer too. Maybe we're gonna have that visible where her hair is, okay? You can use a layer mask on a layer, but you can also use a layer mask on a group, okay? So let's say we've got our group test2 here. Let's put a layer mask on a group, and then I'm gonna use my brush tool and paint with black everywhere that is not her hair. Well, not everywhere, just where this layer is showing up. So I'll make this visible and invisible. And there we can see I've just painted around her hair. So now I've used my layer mask, which if you hold Alt or Option and click on it, looks like that. Not too fancy. This is still only visible where her hair is. Let's just make this invisible real quick. So there we go. I didn't even use the layer mask on the layer. I painted on the group itself. So you don't have to restrict yourself to just a layer. All right, that looks very nice. Good job. All right, the next thing we're going to get to is our adjustment layers, and these are incredibly powerful. So adjustment layers make adjustments to your image. And again, if you've been watching Phlearn, I use these in every single episode. These are things like curves and levels and things like that, okay? So we're gonna grab an adjustment layer. We're just gonna start off with something like curves. Now, I'm not gonna show you in depth what every single one of these does because there's tons of free episodes on that and it would take forever. And you guys should play around with them too. But I'll show you the basics of most of the ones that are useful. So when you have a curves adjustment layer, basically up until now we've been creating new layers and like using a brush tool and painting on them and things like that. An adjustment layer actually adjusts what you see. So we can make things brighter with the curves adjustment layer by bringing this up, or darker by bringing that down. So it's actually adjusting what's on the layers itself. It's going to affect everything that's under it, okay? So it's going all the way down, it's affecting everything that's under it. So this is basically a curves adjustment layer, works with your histogram. Dark information on the left, light information on the right. Click in the middle, bring your midpoint brighter, midpoint darker. On the right side, if you click and drag this down, it brings your white point darker. And if you drag this up, it makes your dark point lighter. You can drag it to the right, which is going to clip your black point. Drag this to the right, from the right to the left, and that's going to clip your white point. So basically the same thing. Now, if you guys are working with brightness, contrast, levels, curves, exposure, like all these things, basically so much of these are just the exact same thing, guys. It's levels and curves, they're the same. It's just, you still got a histogram. You're still adjusting your midpoint here, adjusting your white point, your dark point, you know, it's doing the same exact thing. It's just a different graph, right? It's just a different way of looking at it. So don't worry if you're like, I only get curves, I don't get levels. They do the same thing. So just, you know, don't worry about it. It's just sometimes you prefer one over the other. Okay. Now curves are nice in some ways because you can put like multiple curves, like you can do stuff like this. So technically you have a lot more control over your image. But with that control comes a pretty good ability to just make it look horrible. So, you know, don't worry about that. So let's go back to our curves. Okay, you can also work, so RGB, which is right here, this is red, green, and blue. This is a combination of all your color channels, and it is basically what shows up as brightness. You can also work with your color channels. Red channel, click here, it's going to add more reds. Pull down, it's going to add more greens. or cyans. Go to green and it's pull that up. It's going to add more greens. Pull it down and it's going to add more magentas. Ooh, now that's kind of cool. All right, so adding those magentas and then blue, dragging that up, it's going to add more blue. We can see all kinds of different looks, and you can do this to add color. Quite a bit of interesting things you can do with your image. If you want to duotone, just put some blues in your shadows and some yellows in your highlights, and there you go. You've got like a pretty interesting duotone going on, right? Not bad. Very easy to do. Okay, so let's play around with some other ones. So solid color just fills your entire image with a solid color. You can choose the color you want. Okay. And if you want to, you can change your blending modes. Soft light. Very, very weird looking. Good job. All right, let's hit delete and we'll move on to the next one. Gradient is basically just the same thing as using a gradient layer, but it's just going to fill it with the entire thing. So I don't really use this as much because I just usually use the gradient tool. Let's say cancel there. And we have a pattern, which I really don't use ever, but you can just fill an entire layer with a pattern if you want to do that. Yeah, it's kind of cool. Why not? You can define those patterns as well. Brightness and contrast, I really don't use this that much either because I think curves is just better. Like this is, to me, it's not that powerful and it's just, I don't know. Let's try hitting the auto and see what it gives us. Yeah, I don't like it better. Not as good. I don't really use brightness contrast that much, to be honest. Let's see, levels, again, we talked about that. It's very similar to curves. You can hit auto there and it'll try to like figure everything out, but this is just based on what it thinks should be light and dark. This is not going to make your image better. It's just like, hey, you got some dark areas, let's make them lighter. But what it doesn't know is that those areas are supposed to be dark because they're in shadow. So it's not an underexposed image, it's properly exposed. It's just got some shadow in there. All right, the next one we're going to go, curves we already did, exposure. Make it brighter, make it darker, but it's too crude in my opinion. Like it's blowing out highlights already, you know? I mean, like it's just, no, I don't use it. It's just, it's never gotten to the point. You can pick your white point. Like if you want to pick your white point, you can do that. And you want to pick your black point, you can do that too. Maybe I shouldn't have picked my black point. There we go. You can choose your midtone as well, which I guess is nice. No, you know what? I'm just like, don't use that one very much. Curves, you can, I mean, make, if you just want to make things brighter, darker, curves will do that, I promise. So some of these, but color working with, curves will not affect saturation. So vibrance is cool because you can make things brighter, but it'll tend to leave your skin tones alone. So you can make like trees brighter, but in this case, it's still affecting our skin tones. Curves won't make things either more or less saturated. So hue saturation is another big one, increasing and decreasing your saturation. You can also change the hue of things, making everything look relatively insane. You can also, let's just reset that. You can also choose a specific color. Let's just say we want our reds. Okay, and then I'm going to use my eyedropper to make sure that I have like the reds that I actually want to affect. And then I can change the hue of those reds. There we go, and you can see how it's leaving my background in kind of alone. If I want to affect it like really just that dress, I have to work with this guy a little bit more. There we go, because it's affecting like my entire red range. So I'm going to bring this in just a little bit and then pull it that way, and now it should start to just start to affect those reds, so I can start to pull them in some interesting ways. There we are. And somewhere around there is looking pretty good, but you're still going to have to use a layer mask, which is not that hard. So if, let's say I wanted to make that incredibly bright green, which I do not, so I'm going to lower the opacity. We'll just bring our brightness down so it doesn't look like a scary thing. Okay, we can play with the hue saturation of that. Just click on your layer mask now and then use your brush tool. Just paint black over, you know, where you don't want this adjustment layer to be visible. And on your layer mask makes things invisible, so it's doing exactly what we want. We want this to not affect her skin. I'm doing a very, very quick rough job here, but you can get the idea. You could just paint it visible. There we go. And now we've turned her dress a weird shade of green. Very cool. And not too difficult, I might add. Let's delete that layer. Okay, next we've got our color balance, and this is actually a really great adjustment layer. You can push things. If I want it a little bit more green, a little bit more yellow in there, I can do that. Pull some of the reds out. My highlights, I can kind of balance that out a little bit. Just have some fun with this, and then you can layer mask this out as well. So you could have this be visible, you know, where your trees are, but not necessarily on your person's face. I'm going a bit extreme here, but you get the idea. It's a great way to kind of like tone your image just a little bit. And that looks kind of cool. All right, we'll leave that one out. Next we have black and white, which it makes your image black and white. The cool thing is here is you can adjust your color sliders, so you can actually like choose what you'd like to be lighter or darker. But I'm not the best at black and white. I don't make too many of them. But I do like this filter, or this, the adjustment layer. If you want to add a little bit of tint, you can do that as well. And you can choose what color tint you would like to add there as well. All right. And you can choose to have your yellows be darker. If you use this little hand tool, you can have your greens be lighter and things like that. Okay, cool. Let's turn off that tint. All right, there's our black and white. Let's just delete that layer a little bit. Okay, the next one we're going to go down to is our photo filter, and this you can use it to like warm up an image a little bit, or add some reds into it, or cool it down. And your density is right here. I don't use this a ton. Curves kind of do the same thing, but I do every now and then when you just want to warm things up. It's kind of nice. All right, let's just delete that, and then we're gonna go to our channel mixer, and this is really powerful, and I don't use it that much either as well. Basically, you can choose your different channels and decide how much, like in my green channel, I want to decide how much blue I have in them. You can do a lot of crazy stuff with your channel mixer. Kind of cool, but it's, you know, like you can create something like that, which kind of does look cool, but at the same time, it's more along the lines of just like, it's kind of weird too. So we'll see. I don't know. Jury's still out with this one, but you can definitely, if you're into like really altering color, you can do that with the channel mixer. I just, you know, you can mess it up pretty easy too. And then it's really hard to like get it to look good. Basically, it's the thing about that. Okay. Next we have our color lookup, which you can load like different kinds of looks to your image. Crisp winter, foggy night, things like this. This was added in CS6. So if you guys don't have it, don't be too angry. It's not incredibly useful. All right, let's see. Then we have invert. You won't use that much. Posterize. Again, some of these are used more for like looking for things. Like if you want to like see how your shadows and your highlights play with each other, you can use threshold to do that. But it's not something that you're gonna be like, you know, you're not gonna make that your final image and publish it online. Like these are more for like checking things. Gradient map is kind of interesting. If you want to color, you know, your entire image in a certain way, you can do that with a gradient map. Let's have like a green in there or something like that. Works much like the gradient. There we go. Very amazing. All right, let's delete that. And then we have selective color. And this is actually pretty nice. You can choose your reds, choose like how much yellow you'd like into your reds, how much magenta and things like that. Let's go to our greens, and I can pull in some color in there too. Like maybe I want more cyan in my greens, maybe a little less yellow. Make these either lighter or darker. So you can do a lot of really cool things with selective color as well. We just changed it. Very, very cool. All right, so that's basically our layers. We're gonna jump over into channels real quick because this is a 101 and we don't use it. We don't use two channels too much. But our channels, basically, it's just click on your RGB. You can see the color information of your different channels. So like a red channel, it makes sense that our dress will be bright because there's a lot of red. Our green channel, there's not as much red. And then our blue channel, even less red. So it's going to be a little bit darker. Channels are really nice for making selections if you want to cut things out that have like a large amount of contrast between light and dark. Other than that, they're not as well. They just don't have a lot of uses other than that, to be honest. It's interesting to see your color channels, and you can use them to cut things out. You can always make selections out of your channel. So if I control or command click right here on my red channel, I can make that a selection, and then I could like click on my background layer and I could hit command J, and then I could like move that around. So you can do some interesting things with your channels. But you know, besides like special effects and selections and things like that, there are, there's not a ton of other uses for channels, but they are really helpful when you can cut things out. But it has to be like a red balloon on a blue background or something like that. I couldn't cut her out with channels. That would not work. Okay, and then we have paths, which we already talked about, which was very cool. So paths basically relate to our pen tool. All right, back to layers. Adjustments, these are exactly the same things down here, just like a visual representation of it. Layer styles, please don't use any of these ever. I don't know why they still include these in Photoshop. They're just gross. So don't, just drag that out and hit the X box. So it's for like making gross effects on text and things like that. It's like clip art looking stuff. You're above that. You don't need that. Okay. Next, we're going to look at our menu items. So we have our navigator here. There we go. And our navigator just gives us an idea of what we're doing here. You can zoom in and out right here. So there are always a million ways to do things in Photoshop, right? Okay. Next, we have our color, which you can actually just, choose color up here if you don't like what's going on over there. And swatches, if you like a color and you decide you're going to keep that color, you just go to your swatches and then click that new swatch, and then you can keep that color for later. And you say, that's my favorite color, I'll keep it for all time. Generally, I just keep this on the navigator so I can just kind of see what I'm doing overall. And it's nice to have a little thumbnail here so you can see your image as a whole. You can you get a better feel for things like composition and color and things like that sometimes on just a smaller version of your image. And okay, so here we have our history, our actions. This is 101, so we're really not going to cover actions. Our histogram, you can see dark information and light information. Properties, like if you guys are on a color balance layer, it's going to be the properties for that. Info will give you a lot of information. It'll basically like give you RGB for wherever you go. And if you're on a type tool or your move tool, it'll tell you a little bit about the tool. So brush tool, click and drag to paint using foreground color. Use shift, option, and command for additional options. Pretty cool. Here is our brush and our brush presets. These are, remember we made a custom brush earlier. This is our clone stamp source, which I really don't use this. It's kind of complex. You won't probably wind up doing this either. We've already covered character and paragraph, and this is like notes and things like that. So we've done some nice stuff. So if you want to save what you've got your workspace here. This is like, the essentials workspace. If you want to save this, just go to, like, let's say you're like, you know what? I never use swatches, so get rid of them. And I don't want color there either. And you know what? I don't like my adjustment layers there too. I want like nice, and I want it stripped down and easy, and I don't use those. And my clone source, I'm actually doing what I really do not use. Yeah. I'm like, cool, I don't even need to use those. And let's just dock those together, so I don't need them to be separated. Cool. It's like, yeah, that looks great. All right, everything's good. So I'm going to go down to new workspace, and I'll just call this great, because it is. Keyboard shortcuts and menus will stay the same. So now I know, like, if I want to switch back to like what's new, then it's gonna look like this, and I'm like, I don't like that, but I want to go back to like great, and now we can see it's just great. So that's really good. All right, and that is done with this section. The next one, we're going to do menu items. We're going to cover basically everything that's up here, and it's going to kick butt. You're going to like it.